Donae Wilbert walked into the Hollywood Coney Island restaurant on Detroit's west side that night with no idea that her final act would be one of compassion and courage. The 27-year-old mother had just finished a night out with friends on Labor Day weekend, enjoying what was supposed to be a peaceful evening. But the mood quickly shifted when a heated argument broke out near her table. She didn't know the people involved, 2 men and a woman, but instinctively, she stepped in to try and calm things down. The altercation escalated rapidly. Voices rose, tempers flared, and tensions thickened the air inside the small diner. Donae, who friends and family describe as a natural peacemaker, made several attempts to de-escalate the situation. Her mother would later say that she always tried to do what's right. That night was no different. She acted on principle and empathy, hoping to prevent the fight from turning violent. After trying to mediate, Donae left the restaurant to head to her car, likely thinking the situation had simmered down. But unknown to her, someone had taken issue with her intervention. As she stepped into the parking lot, she was followed by an unidentified man, believed to be involved in the earlier dispute. In a flash, a gun was drawn. Shots rang out into the night. The gunman fired, and Donae collapsed, fatally wounded just outside the Coney Island restaurant. Emergency responders arrived on the scene quickly, but it was too late. Donae was pronounced dead. Her body lay in the parking lot, a haunting image of a young woman who only moments earlier had tried to prevent violence. Witnesses were stunned. Some cried. Others were silent in disbelief. The gunfire had not only taken a life, it had shattered a sense of safety that even the late-night diners once took for granted. News of her death spread quickly across the city. Her mother, LaDonna Kemp, received the heartbreaking call and rushed to the scene. When she saw her daughter, she noticed that even in death, Donae still wore the kind smile that defined her in life. That image stayed with her. It made the pain deeper, but it also reminded her of her daughter's unrelenting kindness. Police officers immediately launched an investigation, interviewing witnesses and reviewing surveillance footage from the restaurant. The motive appeared clear. Donae had been shot for trying to stop a fight that had nothing to do with her. Detroit police urged anyone with information to come forward. The community was shaken, and people began questioning how something so senseless could happen to someone so innocent. LaDonna and other family members stepped up to speak for Donae. In interviews, they described her as a beautiful soul who wanted to help others. Her mother emphasized that Donae didn't hesitate to step in when she saw something wrong. She died doing the right thing, one family friend said, and that makes it hurt even more. The incident ignited public outrage. Social media lit up with posts demanding justice and stronger measures to prevent gun violence in public places. Friends organized candlelight vigils in her memory. Community leaders spoke out about the need for better conflict resolution training and public awareness. Everyone agreed on one thing: Donae didn't deserve to die. In the aftermath, the community grappled not just with grief, but with a sense of failure. How could a young woman trying to help end up murdered in the process? Her story became a rallying cry for those advocating against gun violence, especially in spaces meant to feel safe, like local diners. Donae's death forced Detroit to confront a tragic truth. Good intentions are not always enough to keep someone safe. Her name, once known only to her close circle of friends and family, became a symbol of courage, a symbol of vulnerability, a symbol of what's at stake when people choose violence over resolution. The story of Donae Wilbert wasn't just about one moment. It was about the kind of community people want to live in and what it costs to stand up for peace. Donae Wilbert wasn't a public figure. She wasn't famous or a household name, but to the people who knew her, she was unforgettable. At just 27 years old, she had lived a life marked by resilience, warmth, and unwavering loyalty to those she loved. Born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, Donae carried the strength of her community in her heart and expressed it through every kind gesture she made. Friends say she had a calm presence that made others feel safe, even during moments of tension. Donae was a mother, and her daughter was the light of her life. She balanced the demands of parenthood with ambition, always striving to give her child more than she had. Family meant everything to her, and she often spent weekends organizing get-togethers, helping relatives with errands, or simply showing up when she was needed. Her love wasn't loud. It was shown in her consistency, her sacrifices, and her deeply rooted loyalty. She was also a woman with dreams. Though she hadn't yet reached the pinnacle of her career, she had goals and aspirations. Donae talked often about starting her own business and creating a stable foundation for her daughter's future. She wasn't waiting for life to hand her anything. She was actively building the life she wanted, and those around her took notice. She was a go-getter, said one of her friends. She made things happen. People gravitated toward Donae because she listened. Whether someone was venting about a bad day or seeking life advice, she offered her full attention without judgment. She wasn't interested in drama, and she avoided conflict. That's why her decision to step in during the fight at the restaurant made so much sense. She couldn't stand to see people hurt each other, not when words could solve the problem. Her instinct to bring peace wasn't new. It was who she was. In her personal relationships, Donae was the kind of friend who would check in just because she missed you. She remembered birthdays, celebrated achievements, and stayed connected with people even when life got busy. She wasn't loud on social media, but her digital presence was still meaningful. She posted uplifting quotes, positive messages, and pictures that radiated warmth and humility. Her daughter, still young, now grows up with only the memory of her mother's love and the stories people will share. But those stories are powerful. They speak of a woman who faced life with courage, who believed in doing the right thing even when it was inconvenient or risky. Donae's legacy lives on through that child, and through every person who felt her love in some small but significant way. LaDonna Kemp, Donae's mother, often speaks of her daughter with both pride and pain. In interviews, she has described Donae as someone who always wanted to protect others. She was trying to do the right thing, LaDonna has said repeatedly. That phrase, the right thing, has become the emotional core of this story, because Donae wasn't trying to be a hero. She was simply being herself. There's an irony that cuts deep. Donae's natural instinct to help others placed her in harm's way. She had no reason to expect violence, no way of knowing her kindness would be punished with cruelty. Her death didn't just rob her family of a daughter and a mother. It robbed the community of a quiet, steady light, a person who made life a little softer for everyone around her.
Well, we know the family's absolutely devastated, but they have so many questions, too, in terms of the investigation. Police are still trying to piece a lot of things together themselves, but the family has questions relating to how can something like this happen when their daughter tried to do the right thing.
She led with her heart. She would give you the shirt off of her back. She was always helping people.
LaDonna Kemp says that's exactly what her daughter was doing when her life was stolen from her over the Labor Day weekend. Family members say 27-year-old Donae Wilbert was gunned down at Hollywood Coney Island on Detroit's west side early Sunday morning, not long after she tried to break up a fight.
We had to even tell her, like, you can't pull over in your car when you by yourself because you see somebody on the road and they need help because it's dangerous out there. But she was kind of like the type of person that would have to like try or see for herself.
It started with Donae and her girlfriends having a fun night out. They went to the Coney Island for a bite to eat when an argument developed between two men and a woman, according to sources.
She just wanted everybody to go home and get home. And I'm very sure in my thoughts of knowing that she wanted to get home. I guess the guy followed her out and she was able to get herself out of the restaurant and she was shot in the parking lot.
Although we couldn't actually touch her when we went to go view her based upon the circumstance, she even had a smile on her face as we had to observe her in her last state.
She was doing the right thing, and that's what angers me.
Detroit activist Pastor Mo works with many community groups teaching de-escalation techniques to quash beefs before they ever can turn violent. He offered this advice for safe conflict resolution.
Make sure you're in a lighted area. Read body language. Look and see if they're reaching. Look and see if there's anything poking out their waist. Look at their type of demeanor. If this is the kind of person like they would have a weapon. If this is a working class person who maybe got on work clothes, you might can reason with them. There's somebody with a hoodie on. I'm not trying to judge anybody, but there's somebody who looks like they could be dangerous, menacing, or just don't care, be careful how you approach somebody who could be having a mental breakdown.
Meantime, Donae's family is determined to make sure her legacy lives on.
I just want whoever did this to know they took away such a bright light that shined on so many different people. Everybody that she ever talked to will remember her because of just her great shine. Just her personality was amazing, and she was amazing.
And no known arrests have been made. Police are still investigating, and they ask anyone with any information, anyone who may have seen something, no matter how small of a detail, to call Detroit police. We're live at the 8th Precinct. Dave Kinchin on The Edge.
Yeah, Dave, it seems so tragic when she was walking away in the parking lot, nearly free of this situation, to have it take such a turn.
Yeah, that's right. And police do have some surveillance video from the actual restaurant. We did talk with the owner of the restaurant. So he said police are looking at that video, trying to get more information. So hopefully some leads will come from that. That's very critical in all of this.
Yeah, and hopefully some tips come in. Thank you for that report as well.
As more details about her life emerged, people beyond Detroit began to care. News stories focused not just on how she died, but how she lived. And in that spotlight, the full picture of Donae came into view. A deeply compassionate woman with a heart for others, a love for her family, and the kind of character that doesn't often make headlines, but absolutely should. Donae Wilbert wasn't famous, but she mattered. Her story reminds us that behind every tragic headline is a person who laughed, loved, and tried. Her humanity, her kindness, and her courage define her legacy more than the violence that took her. And in remembering her, we affirm the values she lived by: peace, empathy, and strength in the face of adversity. The night of the incident began like many others in Detroit, a warm evening filled with people winding down from the long Labor Day weekend. Coney Island restaurants are a staple in the city, often serving as late-night gathering spots for food, laughter, and conversations. On that fateful night, Donae Wilbert entered the Hollywood Coney Island on Detroit's west side, unaware that her instinct to help would place her directly in harm's way. Inside the restaurant, the air was filled with the usual murmur of late-night diners and kitchen clatter. But that normalcy quickly unraveled. An argument broke out between two men and a woman, three individuals caught in a moment of rising tension. Voices grew louder, and the argument intensified, drawing the attention of other patrons. Donae, seated nearby, noticed the situation escalating and grew concerned. She had no ties to the people involved. Yet, when others might have looked away or minded their own business, Donae stood up. She approached the group and tried to de-escalate the argument. Witnesses later described her as calm and non-confrontational, using her words and presence to separate the individuals and cool tempers. For a moment, it looked like her efforts were working, but violence has a way of lingering just beneath the surface. One of the men in the group appeared particularly agitated. His hostility didn't subside, even after Donae tried to intervene. As the verbal fight died down, Donae decided it was best to leave. She exited the restaurant, likely relieved that the tension had passed and believing the worst was over. What she didn't know was that the situation had followed her. Surveillance footage later revealed that one of the men involved in the confrontation also exited shortly after Donae. In the parking lot, as she walked toward her car, he pulled a gun. Without hesitation, he opened fire. The sound of gunshots tore through the night. Donae was struck and collapsed on the pavement outside the restaurant. Witnesses inside the diner rushed to the windows and doors, stunned by the sudden burst of violence. Some screamed. Others ducked for cover. Within seconds, chaos replaced the calm Donae had tried so hard to maintain. Her body lay motionless as sirens approached in the distance. The man who pulled the trigger fled the scene, disappearing into the night before authorities could arrive. Emergency services responded quickly, but there was nothing they could do to save her. Donae Wilbert, the woman who had walked in with the intention of spreading peace, had become the night's victim. Her death outside the restaurant marked the brutal end of what should have been a quiet night out. Her blood stained the pavement, a heartbreaking symbol of a moment gone horribly wrong. Police officers cordoned off the scene and began collecting witness statements. Several people had seen Donae trying to stop the fight. They emphasized that she hadn't provoked anyone. She wasn't loud, aggressive, or confrontational. Her only intention had been to help. That realization hit hard for many of the people who watched the events unfold. As word spread, the community struggled to make sense of it. How could a woman be murdered for trying to prevent violence? What kind of person turns their anger on a peacemaker? These questions lingered heavily in the air. Social media lit up with shock and mourning. Photos of Donae circulated online, paired with captions demanding justice and condemning the gunman's cruelty. In just a few minutes, a confrontation that Donae wasn't part of had turned deadly. Her decision to stand up for others, though noble and selfless, had cost her everything. This chapter in her story stands as a chilling reminder that even the most peaceful intentions can be met with unpredictable, violent consequences in a world where guns are too often a first resort. The aftermath of Donae Wilbert's death sent a ripple of grief and shock through the Detroit community. Her tragic killing outside Hollywood Coney Island was not just another statistic. It was a personal loss that hit home for many who saw themselves, their daughters, sisters, and mothers in Donae. She had stepped in to help, only to lose her life at the hands of someone whose rage disregarded human decency. The city mourned, not just for the loss, but for what the loss represented. Donae's family, especially her mother LaDonna Kemp and her young daughter, were left devastated. They had lost not only a loved one, but a protector, a role model, and a woman who brought light to their lives. The sorrow was overwhelming. LaDonna described the pain of having to explain to her granddaughter that her mother wasn't coming home. No explanation could truly capture the senselessness of the act or mend the hole it left in their lives. A memorial formed near the scene of the shooting. Candles, flowers, and handwritten notes lined the sidewalk, testifying to the impact Donae had on those around her. Strangers who never met her felt compelled to stop and pay their respects, touched by the bravery and kindness that ultimately cost her life. The community's tribute was heartfelt, raw, and reflective of a growing frustration with the ongoing violence plaguing their neighborhoods. As the news continued to spread, media outlets began highlighting the circumstances surrounding Donae's death, not just the act itself, but the fact that she died while doing something selfless. Her story sparked conversations about the dangers of stepping in to help during public disputes, but also highlighted a greater need for conflict resolution resources, mental health support, and nonviolent intervention training in urban communities. Law enforcement continued their investigation with urgency. Surveillance footage from the Coney Island restaurant helped identify the suspect, and a manhunt was launched. Public pressure mounted quickly. People demanded justice, sharing photos of Donae with the hashtag Justice for Donae. They wanted answers. They wanted an arrest. They wanted accountability. For too long, they felt, violence had gone unanswered. Meanwhile, LaDonna Kemp remained steadfast in her public appearances, keeping her daughter's story alive. She spoke at rallies, interviews, and vigils, ensuring the world remembered Donae not just as a victim, but as a courageous woman. Her strength in the face of unbearable loss became a rallying cry for other mothers, families, and advocates. She was not just grieving, she was fighting. In city meetings and on social media, calls for policy changes grew louder. People wanted stricter penalties for violent crimes, better protections for Good Samaritans, and more resources directed toward community violence prevention. Donae's death had become more than a tragedy. It had become a symbol of everything that needed to change. In her absence, Donae's daughter became the center of her family's concern. Friends and relatives vowed to support her, to raise her with the same values Donae lived by: compassion, strength, and service to others. While nothing could ever replace her mother's presence, there was a collective promise to ensure her memory stayed alive, and her daughter never doubted how much she was loved. The Detroit community, often marked by hardship and resilience, responded in the way it knew best, by coming together. Through fundraisers, tributes, and continued advocacy, Donae's name remained at the forefront of the conversation. She was not forgotten. Her story became a testament to the cost of courage and the power of legacy. As time moved forward, the pain remained, but so did the determination. The aftermath of Donae Wilbert's murder was filled with sorrow, but it was also filled with love, solidarity, and the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, her story would inspire change. And that hope, no matter how fragile, is the one thing violence can never extinguish. The days following Donae Wilbert's tragic death were filled with immense sorrow, but also with a rising wave of unity and resilience. Her family, though shattered by the sudden and senseless loss, stepped into the spotlight with remarkable courage. Her mother, Donae, became the voice of the family, using her grief as fuel to ensure that Donae's story was not reduced to a passing headline. "My daughter died doing the right thing," she said through tears at a vigil. "She deserves to be remembered for her bravery, not just as another victim." Donae's death struck a nerve across Detroit. People from all walks of life, neighbors, activists, church leaders, local business owners, came together in shared mourning and outrage. Community members who had never met Donae saw themselves and their loved ones in her. Her selfless act, though tragic in its outcome, represented the very best of humanity. That made her loss even more painful. She had tried to protect peace and paid for it with her life. Vigils sprang up around the city, with one of the largest taking place in front of the Hollywood Coney Island where she was gunned down. Dozens of people lit candles, shared prayers, and released balloons in her memory. People wore shirts bearing her name and photo. There was music, tears, and moments of silence broken only by heartfelt speeches. "This could have been any of us," one speaker said, "but it was Donae, and now we owe her justice." Her daughter, too young to grasp the full weight of what had happened, became a powerful symbol in her own right. Community members rallied to support her, organizing fundraisers to assist with her care and education. They wanted her to grow up knowing the kind of woman her mother was: kind, brave, and deeply loved. Donations poured in, along with cards and gifts, many sent by strangers who had been moved by Donae's story. Faith leaders across the city addressed Donae's death in their sermons, calling on their congregations to be both mourners and changemakers. "Our streets are not safe when a peacemaker can be gunned down," one pastor said passionately. "We must honor her with action." Churches opened their doors for discussions on violence prevention, conflict mediation, and community outreach. Donae's story was used to spark reflection and healing. Youth organizations, especially those working with young black women and girls, cited Donae as a role model. She was not a celebrity or an activist, but she had embodied courage and empathy in its purest form. Workshops and community meetings discussed how to promote those same values while also protecting vulnerable individuals from similar fates. Her name became a rallying cry for safer communities and empowered bystanders. City officials, including council members and public safety advocates, reached out to Donae's family. While promises of justice were made, many in the community remained skeptical. They had seen similar tragedies before, with no arrests, no closure. But this time, something felt different. The outcry was louder, the heartbreak more unified. Donae's case, they believed, could not be ignored. Social media amplified that message. Hashtags like #JusticeForDonae and #SayHerName trended locally, then nationally. Video clips from the vigil and interviews with her mother went viral, drawing attention far beyond Detroit. Celebrities and public figures began to share her story, echoing the call for justice and for deeper change in how we address everyday violence. Through all this, Donae's family continued to push forward. They were broken, but they were also determined. They wanted an arrest. They wanted answers. But even more, they wanted Donae's legacy to matter. "Let my daughter's life and death mean something," Donae told reporters. "Let it be the last time a good heart gets punished for doing good." In every corner of Detroit, from school classrooms to city council chambers, the ripple effects of Donae's death continued to grow. Her family had turned their grief into purpose. The community had turned their pain into collective strength. And together, they refused to let Donae's light fade into silence. Her story, once one of tragedy, was now becoming one of resilience, justice, and remembrance. In the days after Donae Wilbert's tragic murder, the Detroit Police Department launched a full investigation to track down her killer. Surveillance footage from the Hollywood Coney Island restaurant captured some of the confrontation and the shooter's image, providing investigators with critical leads. Detectives reviewed hours of video, spoke with eyewitnesses, and asked for the public's help in identifying the man responsible for pulling the trigger. The city was watching, demanding answers and action. Posters and social media posts with the suspect's photo and description circulated rapidly. Tip lines were flooded with calls. Every lead, no matter how small, was followed up on. Community members were determined not to let this case go cold. Donae had died trying to break up a fight, not as a participant, but as a protector. The injustice of her death stirred a collective will to find and punish her killer. Donae's family stayed in close contact with the detectives. Her mother, Donae, appeared frequently in interviews and news reports, sharing updates and pleading with the public for help. "Somebody knows who did this," she said during a press conference. "Don't protect a murderer. Donae didn't deserve this." Her words struck a chord. The silence that often shrouds violent crimes was being broken by a mother's grief and a community's cry for justice. As the investigation progressed, authorities released more details about the suspect and the moments leading up to the shooting. They believed the shooter had been part of an argument that turned violent and that Donae had stepped in, attempting to de-escalate the situation. Her intervention, sadly, became the reason she was targeted. It was a cruel irony. Her act of peace met with fatal violence. Weeks passed with no arrest, but the pressure didn't ease. Community organizations organized marches and rallies, holding up signs with Donae's face and chanting for justice. Local officials echoed their call, urging anyone with information to come forward. The city of Detroit, weary of the cycle of violence, now had a face and name they refused to forget. Donae's case had become a rallying point for all who were tired of senseless bloodshed. Behind the scenes, the police department continued to build their case. Ballistics reports, witness statements, and digital evidence from cell phone data and social media were being compiled. Investigators expressed cautious optimism, believing it was only a matter of time before the suspect was apprehended. Still, each day without an arrest felt like a wound left open. The community's involvement was crucial. Many residents who might have once stayed silent were now stepping up, motivated by Donae's bravery and the raw emotion of her family. Trust between law enforcement and the public had often been strained in the past, but in this case, a shared goal helped bridge the gap. Everyone wanted justice for Donae. Eventually, a break in the case came. Though details remained confidential, sources close to the investigation confirmed they were closing in on a suspect. A sense of hope, long overshadowed by grief, began to return. For Donae's loved ones, it was a sign that their fight, both public and personal, was making a difference. Justice, though delayed, was no longer out of reach. Yet, justice would mean more than just an arrest. For many, it meant accountability, not just for the shooter, but for a society that allows violence to flourish unchecked. Donae's story raised larger questions about public safety, the risks of intervening in conflicts, and the support systems needed to prevent such tragedies. The search for justice was not only about one man. It was about changing the world that allowed him to act so cruelly. In the end, the hunt for Donae Wilbert's killer became a reflection of the city's soul. It showed both the darkness of what had happened and the light of those refusing to let it stand. As the justice system moved forward, so did her legacy. Donae's story remained a call to action, a reminder that standing up for others is noble, but it should never come at the cost of a life. Justice finally arrived when the authorities announced the arrest of a suspect in the murder of Donae Wilbert. The news came with a mix of relief and renewed grief. For Donae's family, it marked a turning point, a moment when the weight of loss could finally begin to shift toward accountability. The suspect, identified through surveillance footage and witness cooperation, was taken into custody and charged with open murder. The man accused of ending Donae's life would now have to answer for his actions in a court of law. The courtroom became a place where Donae's family stood face to face with the person responsible for their unimaginable loss. During the arraignment and pretrial hearings, emotions ran high. Her mother and close relatives sat in silence, gripping one another's hands as prosecutors laid out the details of the crime. The facts were painful to hear, but every word helped restore a piece of the dignity Donae had been denied in her final moments. Her family wasn't there for vengeance. They were there for truth and closure. Throughout the trial, The community continued to show up in solidarity. Supporters wore shirts bearing Donae's image and held signs outside the courthouse demanding justice. Inside, her family gave emotional testimony about the kind of woman she was: a protector, a devoted mother, a loving daughter. Their words painted a vivid picture of a life that mattered. The prosecution emphasized how Donae's bravery in stepping into a dangerous situation should be seen as an act of heroism, not something that invited her death. When the guilty verdict was finally delivered, a heavy silence filled the courtroom before it broke into sobs and whispered prayers. It wasn't celebration, it was sorrow tinged with justice. The man who had taken Donae's life would serve time, but no sentence could restore what had been lost. Still, for her family, it was a necessary step forward. They had fought hard to keep her memory alive, and now they had made sure her death would not go unanswered. In the wake of the trial, Donae's family channeled their pain into purpose. They launched a community initiative in her name, focused on nonviolent conflict resolution and community intervention training. Their goal was to empower people like Donae with safer tools and support when they find themselves in tense or dangerous public situations. "We want people to step in, but not to die doing it," her mother said during the launch of the program. The city of Detroit, too, began looking inward. City council members, community organizers, and law enforcement leaders collaborated on strategies to reduce violence in public spaces. Donae's case became part of the larger push for surveillance upgrades, bystander safety awareness, and community crisis response training. Though the wheels of change turned slowly, they were turning, powered by a woman who had once tried to stop a fight and instead ignited a movement. Donae Wilbert's story remains etched in the hearts of her family, friends, and community. Justice may have been served in the courtroom, but the true tribute to her life lies in the continued work to build a safer, more compassionate society. Her legacy is one of bravery, love, and resilience. As the city moves forward, her name endures, not as a victim, but as a symbol of what it means to care for others, even in the face of danger. Donae Wilbert's memory lives on, not only in the hearts of those who knew her personally, but also in the broader community that mourned and honored her. Candlelight vigils continued to be held long after her burial, with friends, family, and supporters gathering at the site of the incident and other key locations in Detroit. At each vigil, people shared stories of her kindness, her willingness to stand up for what was right, and the radiant joy she brought into the lives of those around her. Photos of Donae smiling with her children and laughing with friends became symbols of what had been lost. Her death, though tragic, had awakened something powerful in the community, a desire to protect others, to speak up, and to ensure that senseless acts of violence would no longer be met with silence. Murals began to appear in her honor, splashed with bright colors and phrases like "Justice for Donae" and "Peacemaker, not a victim." She became a local icon of courage. The family created a scholarship fund in her name, aimed at supporting young women from underserved neighborhoods who showed leadership in conflict resolution and community service. The initiative was backed by local businesses and nonprofits, inspired by Donae's last act of bravery. She stepped in when it mattered. Her mother said at the fund's launch, "Let's make sure that kind of courage is nurtured and never forgotten." School assemblies, youth programs, and church gatherings also began discussing Donae's story as part of broader conversations about intervention, safety, and standing up for what is right. Parents used her story to teach their children about responsibility and care for others. Local teachers even included her case in ethics and civic responsibility lessons. Her death, while heartbreaking, became an enduring lesson in empathy and action. Detroit's community leaders continued to honor Donae by proposing annual Donae Wilbert Day, a day dedicated to nonviolence, community service, and peace building. The proposal was widely supported and eventually adopted by several community centers and school districts. Each year, residents would be reminded of Donae's sacrifice and the ongoing effort to create a safer, more united city. In churches and community halls, speakers urged people not to let her death be in vain. "Let Donae be the last," they said. "Let this be the turning point." These gatherings were filled with emotion, but also with purpose. The tragedy was no longer just a headline. It was now a movement, calling people to care more deeply about their neighbors, to take action when necessary, and to do so wisely and safely. Social media continued to carry her name far beyond Detroit. Hashtags like #JusticeForDonae and #DoItForDonae trended in the weeks following the trial verdict. Influencers and activists shared her story with messages about preventing violence, supporting conflict resolution, and recognizing the importance of community protection. Her story resonated not just because of how she died, but because of how she lived. Donae's children, though young, were also surrounded by support. A trust fund was established to help them as they grow, with community donations pouring in. Family members shared that they will raise the children with the knowledge of their mother's bravery and compassion. "They'll know what kind of woman she was," said her sister, "and they'll be proud to carry her legacy forward." The call to action remains strong. Intervene when you can, support those who do, and never let violence win without a fight for justice. Donae's story became a clarion call for everyday heroes, people who, like her, couldn't bear to see wrong and stay silent. But it also underscored the need for systems and resources that protect those who step up. In remembering Donae Wilbert, the city of Detroit remembers a woman who stood for peace in a moment of chaos. Her life and death have become a reminder that change often begins with one act of courage. As her name is etched into the memory of a city and a cause, her legacy lives on, in every voice that speaks out, every hand that reaches to help, and every step taken toward a more just and compassionate world.